in the very early hours of March 11, 2013 at precisely 1:30 a.m. The door to 13-year-old Kwesi Yeboah's family home was stealthily forced open by an intruder, and the events that unfolded thereon threw an entire community into complete shock, disbelief, and anguish. The family had just lost their dad, Pastor John Opoku, who was the head pastor of a charismatic church he had established at Abuakwa, a densely populated town in the Ashanti region of Ghana, leaving behind his 48-year-old widow Felicity Opoku, 16-year-old daughter Rita Opoku, and 13-year-old son Kwesi Opoku Yeboah. On this particular night, the house was more packed than usual because friends and family and other relatives had come to stay and mourn with this particular family and help them prepare for the pastor's funeral in 2 weeks. So the bedrooms were filled with guests, and there were quite a few people sleeping in the sitting room, and there was also a total power blackout in the community on this particular night, so the entire house was in almost complete darkness. It was in this state that the intruder crept into the house unnoticed until he was right indoors, moving among the sleeping mourners. According to Doris Ifa, one of the family friends having a sleepover at the house, she was one of the 5 people sleeping in the sitting room that night. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, Doris was woken by a loud scream from one other family friend staying over at the house called Akosia. What they witnessed in the partial darkness of the room was appalling to the extreme. There stood the figure of a man in a dark mask, wielding a long knife and still in the process of slashing and repeatedly stabbing a screaming, helpless Felicity Opoku, the widow, who was cornered and desperately trying to shield off the attacker's knife with her bare arms, while he continued to slash and stab her. Her 16-year-old daughter, Rita, having woken up by this time because of all these screams, and trying to look up to try to see what was going on, was struck heavily on the head with a machete that the attacker was carrying, and then he proceeded to slash her up too. It appeared that most of those present in the house at this time were mostly a bunch of helpless women, and they were being maimed and cut up by a lone attacker. All of the other women ran to find places to hide amid screams and sobs while this brutal attack continued. Doris said she could only hide behind a couch in the room. The attacker had been observed looking for his victims with a torchlight before attacking them. So apparently he had specific targets that included the 16-year-old daughter of the deceased pastor and his widow. It was after the intruder had escaped from the scene minutes later that 13-year-old Kwesi Opoku Yeboah was found lying in a corner. His throat had been slit and he was already dead. Most of the witnesses to this atrocity remained in a state of trauma and shock. Not a single one of them could relate the events of that horrible night without sobbing and crying. It was later to be revealed that Felicity herself had witnessed the murder of her son, a junior high school student, and had tried to save him before the attacker turned his knives on her too. Now, the only information they could give to the police was that the attacker was short and wore a mask. In all, 3 people were attacked: the widow and her 2 children. The mother and daughter survived, but at the time of the incident, Felicity was in a critical condition at the hospital. The attacker had left her for dead. Following this outrageous incident, 2 persons were arrested, and they were pastors in the family church. That is, Pastor James Apau, 42 years old, who was also a family member and uncle to the 2 kids. And the other was 64-year-old Kwesi Yeboah, also an uncle of the boy's late father, Pastor John Opoku. Well, this turn of events was a big surprise considering the kind of people they were and their relationship with the victims. It was already been speculated that the attack looked like a contract killing, as nothing was stolen from the house. So these arrests added a shocking dimension to the unfolding story. Well, 13-year-old Kwesi Opoku Yeboah was dead, and his mother, Felicity Opoku, and sister, Rita Opoku, were left with deep machete wounds. Residents of the Kumasi suburb of Abuakwa, where this all happened, were in utter shock after the story broke, and the police had promised to act with dispatch to bring the perpetrator or perpetrators to justice. So, as said earlier, when the police announced the arrest of the 2 church pastors who were also close relatives of the family, barely 24 hours after the gruesome murder, there was a lot of speculation that these men were behind the crime. The public relations officer of the Ashanti Regional Police at the time, ASP Mohammed Yusuf Tanko, said that the police were holding the 2 as prime suspects because there had been a dispute between them and Felicity Opoku over her late husband's estate. The suspects had reportedly locked up some rooms in a house belonging to the late Opoku, denying the widow and her children access to these rooms. Additionally, the police said the architectural design of the house where the family was attacked was of such nature and character that it required sufficient knowledge and familiarity with the house to be able to identify the room in which the victims were sleeping, especially given that the act was carried out when there was a power blackout. Soon, however, another arrest was made, and this time he was identified as the person who had physically committed these acts. He was Abraham Ajay. Now this Abraham, 23 years old, confessed to the crime, and then he made a very strange statement. He told the police that he killed the boy because his mother owed him money, and all efforts to retrieve the money had failed, so he resorted to murder. When asked how much money she owed him, he said 350 cedis, which at the time was equivalent to about $40 US. And while being whisked away, an unremorseful Abraham blurted out to journalists that if they wanted to know why he killed the innocent boy, they should go read Mark 13 verse 12. Now the tragic events of the early hours of March 11, 2013 in Abuakwa, Ghana, where this innocent 13-year-old boy was brutally murdered, his mother and sister grievously injured, shocked the conscience, and it shook people to their core. The unfolding of events painted a grim picture of the vulnerability and helplessness of the victims and the callousness of the perpetrator. Firstly, the intrusion into the home during a time of mourning amplifies the sense of violation. The family already grappling with the loss of their father and husband, was further traumatized by the intrusion of unspeakable violence into their private space. The presence of the guests and the darkness due to a power outage exacerbated the vulnerability of the victims, making it easier for the attacker to strike unnoticed. The brutality of the attack, targeting a grieving widow and her children, reflected a complete disregard for human life and empathy. The assailant's choice of weapon, the knife and the machete, suggested a premeditated intention to inflict maximum harm. The fact that the attacker specifically targeted the widow and her children, possibly due to a dispute over money or whatever, added another layer of cruelty to the crime. The arrest of the other suspects, who were also family members embroiled in a dispute over the deceased pastor's estate, added a chilling dimension to the tragedy. And although it wasn't clearly established whether they had a true connection to the crime, it still highlighted how familial disputes and greed can escalate or contribute to extreme violence, tearing apart the fabric of trust and unity within a family. Abraham Ajay's admission that he murdered Kwesi because his mother owed him money underscored the sheer depravity of his actions. His callousness and lack of remorse, evident in his reference to an apparent misinterpretation of a biblical verse, further emphasized the cold-heartedness of his motive. So in analyzing such a horrific incident, it becomes clear that only a person devoid of empathy and morality could commit such heinous acts. The perpetrator's willingness to inflict unimaginable pain and suffering on innocent victims, including a young boy, reveals a profound moral emptiness and a complete disregard for the sanctity of a human life. Ultimately, I think that this story serves as a stark reminder of the darkness that resides within some individuals and the importance of vigilance in safeguarding against such atrocities. It really underscores the need for people to not underestimate the capacity for some people to commit the most atrocious acts and to always take even ideal sounding threats very seriously. Thank you so much for watching. See you in my next video.